So, I work for the European Commission for what we call DG Growth, Directorate-General for Growth. It was considered as a key word in the EU after the new Parliament, the new Commission. And so we moved from DG Sanco, which is health and consumers, now health only, to the sector of growth, because we consider that we can touch the issues of patient safety with also innovation and economic development, for which in turn improve the patient safety. Wealth is health also. So this is a really symbolic thing that we moved the department where I work to the DG in charge of growth in the European Union. So I start my presentation with the usual disclaimer. You know, we are a bureaucracy, formal administration, and the only important things which is what is published and not what the people say in conferences and so on. So, but however, I try to say things which correspond to the reality of what will be published. So, in the field of UDI, we saw that we needed for a long time to improve the traceability of devices. And we considered, and this is one of the key slides, is we consider that we don't want to make a European law which independently from the international context. So we consider that the internal market, what we call the unified, harmonized EU rules, and the international trade are two sides of the same medal. So we should not disconnect the two aspects. When we do something in the EU, it's always having in mind what's happening in the US, in Japan, in China, and so on. So, for that, we were among the founders of the multilateral cooperation called IMDRF, International Medical Device Cooperation for Regulations. And what do we do with IMDRF? IMDRF, you see the countries involved here. IMDRF is not a legally binding organization. It's a structure, it's a club, where we cooperate freely to try to find consensus among the participants. And when these consensus are found, we see how they could be transposed in the different jurisdictions participating in IMDRF. And also, beyond that, to serve as an international beacon to show that harmonization on the international scale, it's very important for every country. So, in IMDRF, which was launched 3 or 4 years ago already, we define work items according to priorities. And one of the so-called low-hanging fruit, as we call it, was UDI. We needed, and we still need, a unique device identification which can have a global value and not just a regional value. For that, I was in charge of a work group on UDI, and as you can see in the composition of this group, tried to have the broadest coverage, first of all in terms of participants, administrations, but also industry associations, federations, but also covering the different continents. China was in the work group, Japan as well, the US, Canada. Australia was interesting. Australia, it's a big country, but it's a relatively small population. And they said, well, we are happy. You defined a UDI, international UDI, and we will import it. So we have scarce resources. We don't want to put too much effort, but we trust you. It's good because they trust what the other main jurisdictions could achieve. And also we involved other international cooperation network like HWP, the Asian Harmonization Working Party, to serve as a kind of a deployment forum for the outcomes of IMDRF and the UDI work group. The UDI system, you know it very well. There are two parts, sorry. The labeling part and the database part. What we have done is the labeling part. For database part, we are not here yet. And we have the DI, G10, and the PI that we use. So we managed to have a guidance. It was actually the first guidance, the deliverables of IMDRF. And this guidance is on the website of IMDRF. And what's interesting is that about just a few months after, the US FDA published its UDI rule. And the main question, of course, is there a difference between the international IMDRF UDI guidance and the US FDA rule? This guidance contains three parts. The global aspects about the development for using internationally accepted standards, the application of the label, and how to submit it in the proper format to a UDI database. The third part was not tackled. It was for a second phase, which we are still waiting for. But the main aspects of this UDI guidance, that it's, first of all, based on international standard and making use of internationally recognized code issuing agencies, like GS1, of course, but also others, HIBIC and ECCBBA, because it's an open system. There is no monopoly, but in a certain sense, there is, in many cases, a kind of a de facto monopoly. But it's not the issue from regulatory standpoint. These organizations have the responsibility for maintaining the global uniqueness of their coding system. So they have a huge responsibility. And also, we, in the different jurisdictions, we should avoid to add national deviations, because we said UDI, we need such, our country is special, every country is special, of course, or with plenty of justification to add a pinch of salt, making UDI specific to a country. We want to avoid that. We are also aware, we are pragmatic. We know that we don't want a proliferation of code issuing agencies, because it will be more difficult to run. With 2 or 3 available on the market, it will be fine. For the time being, when you look at the situation, we have GS1 and a little bit of HIBIC. We don't have really anything else, but we will discourage to have national initiatives in this domain. So, the outcome of this guidance is summarized in a table, in annex, and I want to thank Volker Zehner, because he said it would be good to summarize the whole guidance in just one page, which says where, how to apply for direct marking or the base package, DI and PI, and how to do this. I will not enter into this detail, of course, but we can have here, at a glance, a view of how to apply UDI in the different categories of devices. So, as I said, a few months after, the US produced its rule on UDI. And the questions about differences, the answer is clearly no. there are no big differences. There are very small differences. They could be actually ironed out when we come to maybe the application, and it's a great success. I must say that it's not by chance. I mean, FDA was a key contributor, and particularly Jay Crowley, when we drafted the guidance and we discussed the things. So it was really a win-win because the FDA rule is more internationally compatible, and the IMDRF guidance is also aligned with the FDA rules. So everyone is happy, particularly the industry, but also the jurisdictions, the administrations, the European Commission. We are also happy because it's a step towards traceability, not limited to the borders of the European Union and more open to international shores. Now, the challenge we have with UDI is that in the US they have their system, the EU is lagging behind, or waiting, or trying to see what's the best situation, but also there will be one in China, one in Japan, and for the industry it means that they will have to apply and to submit their UDI in the different databases. It will be complicated, risk of errors, and expensive. So the ideal situation would have been to have a single global database worldwide. It would be wonderful, but it's a utopia. We know that for many reasons, legal reasons, cost, financing, and all kinds of reasons. It's not possible. However, as a concept, it's interesting because we can use this as a model for a small set of different regional databases. The US have the good ID. In the EU, we would have the EU DID. We could have one in China, one in Japan, one in Brazil, and if just with a limited number of databases, it will be possible to network them and to take them conceptually as a single global database. So, but UDI is one thing. What do we do with UDI now? So in IMDRF, they said, okay, identification for entry into the market, but what we do after that? And there was another project, regulated product submission. In this other project, it was necessary, we decided that we need to have an agreement on a list of data elements, a common list data elements that the different regions could agree upon, that we could use throughout the regulatory life cycle of the device, the pre-market, the post-market, and the compliance recalls aspects. So it's not just the UDI, it's UDI and other data elements. We should agree. So UDI was the first step. Now we look at the extension within the regulated product submission project. We have next week a 4-day meeting in Brussels, 2 days between regulators and industry, and 2 days regulators only, to finalize the list of common data elements. We had, during this summer, a public consultation. It was on the website, the common data elements. We received more than 100 comments, and next week, during the 4 days, we will discuss all these elements to try to find a consensus of the common list. If we find a consensus of common list, we will propose to IMDRF to adopt this as a guidance. So, but now in the EU, what do we do in the meantime? We have defined in a proposal that we sent to the Council and to the Parliament provisions for the future UDI system, the framework, the power delegated to the different stakeholders and to the Commission, the accreditation system, mentioning GS1, and the data elements of the UDI, which are the one in the IMDRF guidance. But this European UDI system is not an isolated system like in the US, where they have the UDI rule. In Europe, we took the approach of a kind of a modular approach with putting UDI in the framework of a more global database that we called EUDAMED, European Data Bank on Medical Devices. And we want to link, first of all, the UDI module with the registration module. It's different with the US. In the US, they have registration is one thing, UDI is another thing, so of course it's linked. But we try to define the two things together in the EU, the two first pillars here. And in a second stage, because we think of a phased approach, it's more pragmatic, we will add the other modules like the certificates, the system on vigilance, the market surveillance, and also modules on clinical investigation. And of course, UDI will be the kind of key to circulate among these different modules. But it will be very complicated. So we just start with an approach, a common approach between registration and UDI in the EU. So where we are, about 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, we submitted two proposals, one for medical devices, the other for IVDs, to the Council and to the Parliament. It took a long time for the Council and the Parliament to discuss this issue. Why? First of all, the document was 250 pages. We have 28 member states, so about 100 persons in the room in the Council. So 100 persons discussing a document of 250 pages, you can imagine, and on issues very difficult, like reprocessing of single-use devices, for instance. And so there was a tremendous work done by the different, also presidency of the EUs. I remind you that in the EU, every 6 months, a country takes over the presidency, and the projects are handed over to the other country. So at the same time, it gives some impetus for each change of presidency. And, but we are, after 3 years, now we are in view of a solution. What do we call a solution? Is a political agreement on the key issues like reprocessing or many others. The Council and the Parliament have now entered into the phase of a so-called trilogue with the Commission, Council, Parliament, discussing these days on the key issues for a shake-hand procedure on these things. We hope to have this political agreement before the Christmas break. After that, the legal services of the Council and of the Parliament will look at the text for a check on the proper legal aspects and publication, and then hopefully we could expect in March or April next year the publication of the two regulations, one on devices, the other on IVDs. The good thing is that the UDI provisions are in an annex of this act. So it looks like, it's not absolutely sure, but it looks like we will not need to have a specific implementing act or delegated act for the UDI provisions. Initially, initially we thought that we will need to have this extra step, but we will save time. It's a shortcut. We hope to have then published before the middle of next year, the UDI provisions, and with for an application with a transition time. Of course, we have always transition times, 2 or 3 years, depending on the provisions. It's too early to predict it, but this is, it means that now we are outside the wood, and the industry is happy that it's harmonized with IMDRF and the US FDA. Sorry. So I want to pay tribute to GS1, who had this slide when I tried to put just below the US development of the. Thank you. Okay. On the upper part, I put the European countries plus Canada, and you see there that we think that we will have. It's a bit of a guess, but the application of UDI for medical devices and IVDs sometime in 2019 in a mandatory application. So we will follow the same principle as the US and as also as in IMDRF, a phased approach, a phased application, starting with class 3 first, and class 2B, and so. But we intend to have a UDI for all classes in the EU. So I put this Chinese saying that's quite famous in China: crossing the river by feeling each stones, wobbling stones. And we consider that in UDI we had a lot of wobbling stones to achieve these things. I think the US FDA also had this experience, but they started earlier, and they resolved a lot of issues, and we are thankful to the US to pave the way for crossing the river on UDI. Thank you very much.